This lecture is on epidemiological concepts that you need to know. So to begin with, we have R0. It's a little bit hard to write in a way that doesn't look like RO, but let's do this. R0, otherwise known as R0. That's how it's officially referred to. And this then is the basic transmission rate of the disease if nothing is done. That is how many other people will catch the disease from one infected person, that's an O, from one infected person on average. So the higher that R0 is, the more contagious the disease is. Now, here is something crucial. If R0 goes below 1, then the disease will spread so slowly that it will die out on its own eventually. Basically, if one infected person goes on to infect less than one other person, then over time there are fewer and fewer infected people in the population, and the disease winds up, the spread stops. Does this make sense? So you will still have people getting sick and dying as the disease itself slowly peters out, but at least you do not have an uncontrolled outbreak. On the other hand, if R0 is above 1, then it will spread. And grow exponentially. So if one person is infected and that person infects 2 other people, and those 2 people each infect 2 people, now 4 people are infected in addition to the original ones, those 4 people each infect 2, now 8 people are infected. These can be very small numbers to begin with, but one of the problems with doubling is that it does not appear to be a problem until the sheer extent of the problem does not become obvious until very late in the game. Think of a lily pad on a pond. Maybe it doubles the number of lily pads every day. For a long time, it won't seem like it's terribly much of a problem. The day before the pond is completely covered, only half the pond is covered. Boom, then it's completely covered. So as I said, you can wind up having these doubling effects that seem very small at first, but left unchecked will lead to all kinds of disastrous consequences. Now, just to add some subtlety to this, however, R naught can vary. Depending on the population. So the R naught of COVID-19 is between 2.4 and 3.3. And this means that without measures taken to curb the spread of the virus, the rate of new infections would grow exponentially until about 70% of the population has been infected. So you can think of R naught as a disease's potential, basically. To spread through a population. However, the actual transmission rate can be lowered. That's what we've been trying to do for the past quite a few months. through measures, in the case of COVID-19, through measures like screening, that is to say testing, mask wearing, and social distancing. And sometimes, just as a slightly different epidemiological concept here, sometimes the actual rate of transmission is expressed as RT. So RT then is the virus's actual transmission rate at a given time, which is T. So the transmission rate at any given time is RT, and that will depend upon how well the containment measures are being practiced and how well they are working. So, if we slow the spreading rate to R naught is less than 1, and this can also be expressed as RT is less than 1. Then eventually the disease will die out. But remember, that unless the disease is actually wiped out, and by wiped out, I mean wiped out entirely, ceasing to exist altogether, then R naught can go up again if restrictions are lifted. These are the problems we're living with right now in November of 2020. Now, for some other concepts that are useful to know regarding epidemiology, let's go over here. Let's give ourselves some room. There's the concept of a leading indicator. So, for COVID-19, as an example, though the concept of leading indicator is applicable more generally. So for COVID-19, these are things you can measure, first of all. That suggest regarding the disease what is likely to happen in the future. So they, meaning your leading indicators then, these then are forward-looking. Providing early insights into shifts that lie ahead. So here then is a really easy example. Just to give you the idea then. Testing then can be a leading indicator since an increase in positive tests in a given population then indicates a future increase in hospitalizations. So when you see an increase in positive tests, that if you're just testing generally in a given area and you suddenly start seeing this increase in positive tests, you can intuit from that there's going to be a general increase in the population in that area at large, and that means that the hospitals are going to be more busy in a few weeks' time. So that in that particular case, positive tests are a leading indicator for hospitalizations. So as I said, it's something that gives you a little glimpse into the future. One interesting thing is that apparently sewage is a leading indicator for hospitalizations because the virus is present in feces of infected people. And there are a lot of people who may not know that they are infected, but they are passing the virus through their feces. And if feces are tested, if the sewage in a given city or a given area starts seeing more and more presence of the viruses may be dead. They're just testing for DNA, or for RNA rather. They're just testing for RNA. But if they find an increase in viral RNA in the city's sewage, they can pretty much count on there being an increase in hospitalizations in a few weeks' time. So that then is a leading indicator. Then there is also a lagging indicator. These basically kind of tell you what happened, or may give you some clues as to what happened. So these now are backward looking. And these then will be showing outcomes that happened. Outcomes, let's put it this way. Outcomes that resulted from what happened in prior days or weeks. So let's do an example. This is pretty obvious, an increase in deaths then can be a lagging indicator showing that there was an increase in COVID-19 cases in the weeks and months prior. So if there's an increase in deaths, then one can look at events in the preceding weeks or months that might have caused greater spread of the disease. So, for instance, the big motorcycle rally that took place in Sturgis, Montana, in August of 2020, although the rally itself was held outdoors, there are lots and lots of bars where people spend time for, the 3 days or so of the event, where hotels are full and bars are full and restaurants are full, and people were not masking and they were crowded very close together. And we are now seeing an increase in deaths in the areas that are within a relatively easy motorcycle ride of Sturgis, South Dakota. Anyway, the point is, Sturgis, South Dakota had this big motorcycle rally, and we are now winding up seeing an increase in deaths in the areas that are, as I said, within a day or two's motorcycle ride of Sturgis. And so that is a case where the deaths are a lagging indicator. You can then look and say, well, what happened during those preceding weeks and months that might have caused this sudden increase in deaths? And that could be one example, but there are many. But where you suddenly see an increase in deaths, you can then look back and say, okay, what happened earlier that we're now seeing this? So as I said, that then is a lagging indicator. And that is it for this lecture.